Well, you're not working.
No. Hi, come on. We're live.
Welcome to day 10 NSCT 2018 here in Grand Junction, Colorado. Tonight we're going to look at the history of NLP. There are lots of information. I think there's 77 slides that we'll be covering. And then afterwards we'll entertain questions and things. So sit back. Here's the history. The history of any family is as healthy as we don't keep secrets. So tonight is to reveal the secrets. Anyway, as trainers, people would ask you, where did it come from? When did it start? Who was involved? How did it evolve from what it is now? And so the design of all of these slides is to answer those questions. So 3 letters, strange letters, NLP. PNL in Mexico. So do you know what it is? That's the question. Do you know what it is? Are you ready to enter the matrix and to really understand where it came from? It may be a strange journey that we're ready to do. In fact, even understanding the history, like NLP itself, is like taking the red pill. Well, it began with 3 crazy and unlikely guys. I think we should have this picture with that. Here's the 3 guys. As they look like today, 40 years later, you have to use your imagination to what they look like back then. Back then, Richard Manley was a skinny kid. He was 21 years old when it all began. And John was 31. And Frank was in between them at 27. And Frank Kuselik was the one probably you don't know about. It began at Santa Cruz, California. This is right on the Pacific Ocean. We did the NLP Leadership, Visionary Leadership Project in 1997 at that venue, right on the beach, Santa Cruz. This is Santa Cruz, not a very good picture. Santa Cruz and the mountains there, right on the ocean. Here's a better picture of the city, and you can see the surrounding area. It goes up into mountains, into redwood trees. And the college, the Kresge College, and the other 9 colleges that make up at Santa Cruz is up in there. So here's a sign that leads up into there. You can see the redwood trees. The college, as all those colleges, are up in the redwood trees. We did the 40-year anniversary there just a couple of years ago, 2008. And that's where we did the Millennial Project in the year 2000. And that is where Robert Dills and Teresa Epstein conducts NLPU every summer as they rent that college venue. Robert Spitzer, medical doctor, psychiatrist, and also publisher of Science and Behavior books. Science and Behavior Books was a publishing company that published all of the early NLP books. Structure of Magic, Patterns of the Hypnotic Language of Milton Erickson, and prior to that, and continuing on, he published also all of Virginia Satir's works. He was her publisher. He published all of Fritz Perl's works. So he had gotten acquainted with Richard many, many years earlier. We think when Richard was 14 or 15, Richard had a speech impediment. We think it was stuttering. And the story is that Robert Spitzer worked with him and helped him to get over that speech impediment. And part of the story is that Spitzer asked him to think of a famous movie star and to watch movies of that famous movie star and to begin talking and imitating and copying that movie star. Do you know who that movie star was? It was John Wayne. And so several people have said that Richard, in his American accent, sounds more like he's from Texas and has a swagger. But the audio tapes and video recordings, those 8mm reels from Fritz Perls, on the estate of Fritz Perls, because Perls died in 1970, January 1970, he asked Richard to transcribe those audio tapes. And so out of that transcription came the book, Gestalt Therapy Observed and Eyewitness to Therapy. So Richard completed the transference of that information, began editing the book, and then his name was on the book as editor. So here's a picture of Fritz. And so Richard began transcribing the presentations as Fritz did Gestalt presentations and was teaching about Gestalt. And so that's how it all began. That was late 1971 into 72. So Fritz Perls had developed Gestalt therapy from Gestalt psychology, which was co-developed by Max Wertheimer. Basic themes in Gestalt, don't ask why. That's where it came from in NLP. Lose your mind, come to your senses. Get out of your computer mind. Be here now. Those are the themes of Fritz, which is all about sensory awareness and being sensory present. So Richard played around with copying his voice and language patterns. He found that he could do Fritz with similar results. And it was at that time that he and Frank got acquainted and began the Gestalt class. So this is about Dr. Spitzer asking Richard to complete that book. There's a picture of that book, Gestalt Approach, Eyewitness to Therapy, which if you read it, you'll see a lot of NLP in that book. Fritz Perls was a wild man, and if you look at him, he looks like a wild, hairy beast of a person. He defined himself as a dirty man. In his biography, and the title of his biography, published by Real People Press, was In and Out of the Garbage Can. Now, who would write a biography entitled In and Out of the Garbage Can? But in that book, he defined himself as a dirty old man. He was proud of it. And being a dirty old man, once he got to Esalen, he liked getting naked, as everybody did, in the hot pools, and being a dirty old man. He had learned psychoanalysis originally, and from his studies of Gestalt psychology from Max, he began developing a therapy out of that. So they would do an encounter group, a hot chair group, and he would confront and challenge people to get real. Here's Esalen. Esalen, California, not too far from Santa Cruz. And there's an overview picture of Esalen, which is right on at Big Sur, California, right way up in the hills and overlooking, and the hot springs, hot sulfur springs. And to this day, clothing is optional. I've said that several times, and several of our trainers have gone there. They said to check it out to see if I was telling the truth. But I think they were checking something else out. Getting there is not easy. So the highway there, to this day, is not a very good highway. It's a 1- and 2-lane road getting there. And this is Esalen, California, which was the headquarters of the Human Potential Movement. A little bit more about that. Esalen began in 1963 when 2 young men in their 20s Michael Murphy, Richard Price, heard about the human potential movement and said, let's create the headquarters. And so 1962, they bought it. 1963, they were ready to open it. And 1963, Fritz Perls moves onto the property of Esalen to become the first scholar in residence at Esalen. Gregory Bates, in the same year, did the second workshop at Esalen. And the next year, Virginia Satir moves on to Esalen and lives there. She becomes the director of training and development. And so 3 people who play key role, foundational role. 2 are modeled. 1 provides the background and the theory for all the modeling, are at Esalen, are the human potential movement. And so Esalen tells us about the secret history of NLP. That the who's who of NLP lived there, worked there, led the human potential movement at Esalen. We'll come back to that a little bit later. So that here's the secret history that isn't told very often as to where did Richard, John, Frank, and the rest of the team there in Santa Cruz, where did they get their information? From Virginia, Fritz, Gregory Bateson, and it just so happens that they were 2nd-generation leaders of the human potential movement. I did not know that until 2005. I did not know that. It was in no history book. No one ever talked about it. And so now we're finding a strand backwards. So if we go backwards to Fritz and how it started. Frank had studied Gestalt psychology, therapy in San Diego. He transferred to Santa Cruz. Somehow, some way, I don't know the story, he and Richard met. Somehow they found out they were both interested in Gestalt therapy. And so they decided to put a Gestalt class together at the University of Santa Cruz at Kresge College. And so that's how it began. NLP began as a Gestalt class. And everything they did was Gestalt. The first class, you can see all the different names there of the people that was in that class who took it. 1972, 73, 74. By 74, those people had finished their studies at the college and were moving on. And so if you read that list, who's that? So one of the most fascinating things, and no one has explained it to my satisfaction, how is it that that first class didn't know what they had? They were the class that created the meta model. They were the class that worked it and discovered and experimented with the representational systems and I-access and cues and the meta model language and distinctions. And they all walked away except for Terry McClintock. He's in the second group. Terry McClintock wrote the book, The Wild Days of NLP, 1971 to 1978, I think is the title of the book. And so he was the first historian. And the little book he put together is almost like a cartoon book with some drawings that they made and just really a brief description of what they were doing. And when you read it, you really can appreciate that it all started with Gestalt. The second class began in 1975. And the names in the second group, Robert Dills, Judith Dillinger, Leslie Cameron Bandler, David Gordon, Todd Epstein, Terry McClintock, Stephen Gilligan. The key ones that to this day are, except for Todd, are key leaders in the field of NLP. They were in the second class. So here's my learning. NLP began as a collaborative community. It wasn't created by two people. There were three people involved. First, Richard and Frank. And they ran the class. They ran the class week after week after week after week. And they were just amazed at the results they were getting. And they couldn't explain it. So Richard kept asking John, because Richard had attended John's transformational grammar class at Rescue College. And he kept asking John, come and see this. John did not want to go to the therapy group. He didn't believe in therapy. He was pretty much a socialist. He was teaching Marxist economics at the college. He was quite revolutionary. He describes himself that way. So he led all kinds of protests in the streets against the war in Vietnam, 1971, 72, 73. And so he didn't want to come. And eventually, 3, 4, 5 times, finally he said, okay, I'll come. When he went and saw what they could do with language, and Richard said, tell us, how's this working? John said, I'll tell you how it's working, but the deal is, I learned to do it, and that's the arrangement. So I want to learn how to do this, because he saw that people were coming alive, and it wasn't brainwashing, as he had thought. So then Richard and John became best friends. Before that, it was Richard and Frank. And as they came there, Frank was married to Judith Delosier. They were husband and wife. They married in San Diego, moved to Santa Cruz, and in 1975, 1973, Judith left Frank, and a couple of years later, she got with John. They got married. 1974, Frank got with Leslie Cameron, and they became life partners. 1975, Leslie goes to meet Erickson, Milton on the trip with Richard and John and David and Stephen. And when she came back, Frank says she was different. She left him and eventually married Richard. So this is the, it was just right after the 1960s.
Collaboration.
The love generation. And everybody was sleeping with everybody.
Collaboration.
And so another kind of collaboration. In 1975, Robert Dilts enters into the second group, and Robert, for his class projects, was doing research and writings on what they were discovering. And those class papers now makes up the book, Roots of NLP, and Applications of NLP, 2 hardback books of all his class papers that he wrote in those years, which actually became the first writings that were readable. 1975, Structure of Magic is written, and you won't find any of their names in the book at all. Structure of Magic, you won't find a single one of their names, not even Frank's name. And so Richard and John did, just my opinion about it, they took credits and gave credit to no one else, which is why from then on, NLP was created by Richard and John. And Frank was left out, the whole group was left out. So the competition began at that point. They realized what they had, and they realized what they could run with. And so the first books printed, written in 1975, and that's when NLP is dated as the beginning with the books. Because before then, it was just Gestalt class. And what they called themselves was meta. They called themselves the meta people. And Frank called them his meta kids. And he still talks that way to this day. And so meta was the name until 1976, when the name came. Backing up also, Virginia Satir, 1973 or 4, I don't remember the date just right now. Dr. Spitzer asked Richard to go to Canada. Virginia was at a certain university. She was doing a special seminar for 30 days with the students studying family systems. And so in the master's degree program, so he went to record what she was doing. He was in a recording booth, and in that recording booth, he was playing rock and roll music really loud, and he was playing Pink Floyd. And so the story is that Virginia came down and opened that door so she could hear that music playing. And she looked down at Richard. She was 6'2", Richard's 6'5". And she said, "What are you doing with that? Turn that off." And he immediately said, and as part of his gig, he's pretty quick. He said, "You do 7 patterns." And she said, "Name them." And so he named the first 4. She's okay, yes, yes, yes. And the next 3, oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. He could name the pattern she was doing. And she was unconscious of those patterns. Now the story goes, he said, anybody can do this stuff, which fits his character. And she said, "Get on stage, show me." He marched on stage and did some family constellation. And she had that, oh my God, how can you know this? I'm teaching all these people for 30 days, and how do you have it? Which one, well, once again, his ability to copy both patterns and language, which is what he could do with Fritz. As he was transcribing with Fritz, he would pick up the language patterns, and he would get into that growling tone of voice of Fritz and say, "Lose your mind, come to your senses, put your old mother in that chair." And Richard would talk that way. And Dr. Spitzer walked in, "Hello, Dr. Spitzer." And he would say, "Fritz, I mean Richard." And so Dr. Spitzer had written a couple articles saying that it was so realistic to him that he would call Richard Fritz. So this was his gift of mimicking, and it's what started all the modeling at that time. Now what John did, he essentially took transformational grammar and he imposed it upon both Virginia and Fritz's therapy language as they were working with people in the human potential movement to help them to come alive and get real. And so transformational grammar coming out of cognitive psychology, and George Miller and the other members there, Noam Chomsky, was imposed upon it. So they ended up studying transformational grammar and some of this language and started expanding it. So they moved out of Gestalt and they started creating the first model of NLP, the meta model. That was about 1973, maybe 4, somewhere in there. By 1974, John said they had written the manuscript. It was published in 75 on the meta model. So here's Frank. Frank with John. Frank was married to Judith DeLosier. They had a child, and that's Eric. And so when John married Judith, John became the stepfather for Eric, who was Frank's son. And so then they had a tie that ties them together to this day. The son that they both raised, kind of. And so Frank Paselic, we didn't even know about him. In 1993, Byron Lewis, who was part of the second group, Byron, maybe part of the first group, Byron Lewis had gone with Frank in 1977, 78 to San Diego, and they started the Meta Institute. And while Frank was teaching the meta model, Byron wrote it down, and they published the book. I think it was 1993, they published the first book, Magic Demystified, which is a simpler book on the meta model. It's really Frank Ruselic's take on the meta model. They did second edition in 2013, I think, and both Byron and Frank had seen my work, 1997, on communication magic. So they added the other 9 distinctions to the meta model to present in Magic Demystified, second edition, the extended meta model. But you won't see Frank's name on the book, because John was all upset and said, if you put your name on there, our friendship's over forever. And so Frank did not put his name on the second edition because John threatened him. So that's some of that background. Frank was a collaborator. He stayed with them until 1976, 77. 1976, when Leslie was with Richard in 1977, they married. Richard threatened Frank and said, if you stay here in Santa Cruz with me, I'll kill Leslie. And so with that threat, Frank believed him and took off to San Diego with 4 or 5 of the magic persons. So that ended the collaboration of the 3. And when the 3 ended, because Frank's role, he was the maven. He was the collaborator, not the mavens. Maven being people with specialized knowledge. Richard had the specialized intelligence of modeling, copying, mimicking. John, transformation of grammar. Frank brought them together. Frank ran the groups. Frank would run the practice groups, after a while, when John and Richard stepped out, he would go, tell them what was going on. They would invent some other exercise. Frank would go back and run it. He'd report on the experiment, what happened. So he was the one that held them together. After he left, that's when they couldn't work together. 1974, Gregory Bateson introduces Milton Erickson to them. And there was a small group, Richard, John, Judith, Leslie, Stephen Gilligan, a small group that went down to Phoenix to meet Erickson and to begin the modeling of Erickson. And so they found the Milton model, the linguistic distinctions that allow them to do the hypnosis work, the trance work. And the first volume, 2 volumes, Hypnotic Patterns of Milton H. Erickson. Volume 1 was published in 1975 as well. Volume 2 was 76. And so this introduced now hypnosis into NLP, which, in my opinion, is how NLP started going way off of the original design of modeling excellence. Yes, they modeled excellence in hypnosis, but when they got hypnosis, they wanted to find out what else could we do. And the difference between the meta model, where you ask people, and you help people be clear, and you help people get out of trances, and people now are at choice point and running their own brains. Hypnosis induces and usually and it's a different direction. I put you back in state. So it's what we do to people. And I think it's what started the bad press that NLP is manipulative. Organizing what the 3 were finding trading. So he wrote his first paper on Neuro-Linguistic programming in 1976. It was a class paper. As that paper expanded and he enriched it, Richard and John is said to have said, let's turn that into a book. And so the book that showed up was 1980, NLP, Neuro-Linguistic Programming, the study of the structure of subjective experience, which is mostly Robert's work. Robert really deserves the credit for being able to write it in a very readable form. Steve Andreas enters 1977, 78. He wasn't Steve Andreas, he was John Stevens. Then he became Steve Stevens. He changed his name several times. And Steve Andreas was a famous Gestalt therapist. I mean, he was famous. He was the editor of the American magazine for Gestalt. He was the president of the Association of Gestalt. So he had learned Gestalt. He sat in the class with Abraham Maslow. Abraham Maslow was his mentor. He then went to another college and studied under Carl Rogers. His original study, he got a master's degree in chemistry. So he was always looking for breaking down things into elemental pieces. And when he came into NLP, he continued doing that, thinking that submodalities are smaller pieces than modalities. He became very much an expert in submodalities and did a lot of work there. What was his strength became, in my opinion, his weakness. He could not see meta. And so his books, Six Blind Elephants, criticizes me and Robert Dill severely, and saying we just do not understand how reality works. There is none of this meta stuff. Connie Ray Andreas, they married just a few years before that. And when they married, and when they took their first NLP training, 78, from Richard and John, they realized this is a game changer. So they came into NLP, and Steve brought thousands of Gestalt therapists into NLP. He wrote out, he said, this will change the world. This is what we've all been looking for. So he was the one who gave up his Gestalt status, position, and became a learner. His mother, Barry Stevens, who had founded Real People Press, which was a Gestalt publishing company, and she was a mistress of Fritz Perls. When she found out that he was going to NLP, she just could not stand it. And so Steve took Connie Ray's name, and they became Steve and Connie Ray Andreas. When she died, of course, Steve inherited the Real People Press, and it became an NLP press. They together taped seminars and wrote books. The first one was Frogs and the Princes, 1978. And that began to put NLP on the map. Then Connie Ray transcribed and edited the book Transformations, which at that time was the most popular book in NLP. It sold in the first few years 150,000 copies, because it really, and it to this day, is the best book for learning how to do trance. So she brought hypnotists and hypnotherapists from all over into NLP. Then they put together the book Reframing, and they published these books with Real People Press. And then in 1985, Steve put together the book Using Your Brain for a Change. So that was the original books that they did from Richard and John, and so they really put NLP and Richard and John on the map. They also created the very first NLP training center at Boulder, Colorado, just over all the mountains in Boulder, Colorado, outside of Denver. That was the first institute of NLP. Backing up further, Korzybski. So, Polish-American philosopher and scientist. He wrote the book Science and Sanity. He wrote the book Manhood of Humanity. So we would call him the grandfather of NLP. In putting together the theory of NLP, the cognitive psychology theory, it goes back to the map, how we mentally map things. It is different from the territory. And so Korzybski created neuro-linguistic trainings and trained in the 1940s throughout this country. And he also used the word neuro-semantics as a synonym. So if you pick up his introduction, his preface, 1941, you'll see those words used interchangeably page after page after page as he talks about the neuro-linguistics, neuro-semantics that run our lives. So he's a scientist, he's a mathematician, he's a bridge builder, and so he played that role. He invented the hyphenated words. One of the ways that he introduced in the meta model that I took from him, put in the meta model, was to hyphenate. So there are some words that are system words that have been torn apart. And he argued we need to put mind dash body, we need to put it back together. One thing. Just like, and he quoted Einstein. In fact, he has an appendix about Einstein. Einstein's discovery was he discovered time dash space. It's not time and space, it's time-space continuum. So Einstein discovered a whole new paradigm when he put the polarized world back together. That's why I really encourage you to use the hyphens. Meta-coaching, neuro-semantics. That put it together, keep it together. It's a unique part of what we're doing. And so when there's system things, and so he introduced that in 1941. There is on YouTube some videos of him speaking. If you have insomnia, turn that on. It'll put you to sleep. He was not a speaker. He did not go through anesthesia. But he had great content. As an engineer, he sought to establish a new psychology based on correct language. And that's what general semantics means and is all about. And reading through Science and Sanity, I realized in 1992, 91, 92, there's so many linguistic distinctions, and they're not in the meta model. So multi-ordinality that we introduced the other day, and other things, and pseudo words that have no reference. So I started writing articles, and they were published in multiple languages in the 1991 and 2. And later, Richard asked me to put those into a review of the meta model. And that led to Communication Magic. Where did all of that come from? So let's back up even further in history. And so we go back to the 1930s. Here's Abraham Maslow, who founded the third force in psychology after psychoanalysis and behaviorism. He was a behaviorist. His doctorate was in behaviorism. And he realized it didn't explain things. There's a quotation, he said, I'm a behaviorist. I was a behaviorist until my first daughter was born. And when my second daughter was born, every part of behaviorism blown out. Because these people, these two persons coming into the world, I couldn't condition them to anything I wanted. They had their own direction. They had their own predispositions. And the best I could do is to help guide them in their right way. And that idea of guiding people in their own right way was the central theme of the third force and began the human potential movement. Now, let's back up even further. So now we go to Max Wertheimer, who was the co-founder of Gestalt psychology. He was a mentor of Abraham Maslow. And Ruth Benedict was the founder of cultural anthropology. Her student was Margaret Mead, who was Gregory Bateson's first wife. So these two were his mentors, and they were the first persons he studied for the excellence of being fully human. It happened at the party when he saw all these graduate students from so many different countries and languages coming together and having a party. And he contrasted that to the outside world, because World War II was beginning. And every day he was hearing about dictatorship and the racism that was going on at that time. And he was contrasting, how can this be existing when that's existing? So what made the difference? Oh, these two people made the difference. And then he started sneaking around modeling them. This was 45 years before Richard and John and Frank modeled Virginia and Fritz. So he started modeling them. He had an empty notebook. He put at the top, good humans studies. Well, if you're a behaviorist and you want to study a good specimen of an animal, you get the best specimens. And he said, oh, I got two good specimens. I want to see what these specimens are like. So he started modeling what are their characteristics. Eventually, as a college professor, this was the homework he gave to every class as he presented psychology. Go find people fully functioning or fully functioning in some area, and let's describe them. And out of that came the 19 characteristics of self-actualizing people. Prior to the development of NLP, Maslow created this paradigm shift in psychology, which answered the question, which is the human instinct? And with the pyramid, 1941, he essentially said, everybody's right. It's sex, and it's food, and it's shelter, and it's money, and it's all that. And it's safety, and security, and protection, and it's being loved and connected and bonded and a sense of community. And it's feeling good about yourself and confidence and knowing where you are in the society. And there's more. And he distinguished it between the lower needs, deficiency needs, and the higher needs, being needs. And with the being needs, as a behaviorist, he could understand and easily go to the bottom four. And his book, Motivation and Personality, just details how much we need those. And we're driven by those. And those are our values. But they're hierarchical in that when they're fulfilled, 50%, 60%, 40%, when they basically have a need, we move and new needs arise. And so he essentially said, well, all of these are quote unquote instincts, and yet none is an instinct in the way animals have instincts. None have information content, just the urge, but we don't know how. So now moving to the self-actualization needs, the human needs, the first human need is to know how. Knowledge, meaning, understanding. And so if there is any instinct, it's to learn how things work. what things are, how to meet my needs. And learn, we do. And if you mislearn, you'll have a neurotic need, which for the most part doesn't occur with animals, because they just know. And so because we have such a vast gap for learning, we can mislearn. And we can learn to do it properly. And so there are higher needs, higher drives, higher values. So that the hierarchy is not only a hierarchy of needs, but a hierarchy of values. These are things you need, therefore you value. And that with discovering that human being has higher needs than animals, led to the discovery there's human potentials. There's human potentials because animals need, the social, intelligent animals need all the first four. Those are just animal needs. And he's got to be a good animal, have good appetites. And so the human potential started coming. Carl Rogers was thinking about this in the same way, very similar way. So they unified their times together. This is Carl Rogers. That's Mr. Rogers. We were talking about Mr. Rogers the other day. Welcome to my neighborhood. Well, Carl Rogers was kind of like Mr. Rogers. Carl Rogers joined NASCO. He said that self-actualization is being a fully functioning human being. He said it's being the best you can be. And you do that by actualizing your potentials. This created a whole new direction, a whole new paradigm, that human psychology is not just conditioning ourselves and getting over our conditioning and being genetically determined. That determinism is now gone because we create ourselves through our learning and meanings. And there's potentials. There's all kinds of potentials. And so this began the human potential movement. And so that's the background. Leading us up to the 1970s when it got started, when it was given birth, 1975, officially. And it stayed together until 1978. So it wasn't long after Frank left that John and Richard separated, while millions of dollars were going through their hands, through the training, millions for training, because the world rushed to them. And they went bankrupt in 1978, which is kind of suspicious. Like, with all that money coming in, where's all that money going? But they both declared bankruptcy. They created a society in NLP, and Leslie Cameron Bandler had really put that together, and Robert Dills, and then they went bankrupt in 1979. 1979, John Bridger signed some papers, and it was officially dated in 1981, and he signed some papers that said, for the next 10 years, I agree. Anytime I want to train NLP in the United States, Richard will approve 6 cities that I can train NLP in. And John signed it. That Richard would monitor and have control of where John could train NLP. And many of us have asked, why in the world would John sign some ridiculous thing like that? Richard was doing drugs very, very heavy in those years, middle 70s, doing a lot of cocaine, LSD. And so Steve Andreas told me one time he thought that John signed it because John didn't think Richard would live much longer with all that drug use. But for whatever reason, he signed it. The Society of NLP, the trademark for the Society of NLP, went into public domain. 6 people then bought it. 6 people bought it. Christina Hall, no relation to myself, and 5 other people. Will McDonald, one of my trainers. Christine Hall was one of my trainers. Andy Linton, and 3 others. They bought it. So later they became known as the Bamber Group, who owned the Society of NLP trademark, and they allowed Richard to use that. So that takes us up to the 1980s. Key people that was working at that time, Judith G. Lozier, and then Robert Dilts. They turned the Wild Days into a community. So even though Richard and John was around and people were looking to them for new ideas and patterns and trainings, really the stabilization occurred here. As also from Stephen Ray, from Leslie, from Steve Gilligan, Wyatt Woodsmall. There's other key persons, but these are among that first generation that began formalizing NLP. Leslie created NLP Prac. She put together what would constitute the foundation materials of what you need to know to be an NLP practitioner. Later, she put together the master practitioner training. Robert helped her, but she was the one who really organized that. She and Steve were really the only 2 therapists at therapy training. Steve Gilligan, he made his emphasis with hypnosis and Milton Erickson. Wyatt Woodsmall had a PhD in religious studies from university back east. He worked in the military, and so he came into NLP probably in the late 70s and became a key figure, organizing many things. He later wrote the book Timeline Therapy and Structured Personality. We also have Robert, and then we have Teresa Epstein. Her husband, Todd Epstein, was one of the early developers, and he died, I want to say he died somewhere late 80s, early 90s. And then Teresa owns the training company called NLPU. NLPU is not a university thing, it's a training company. She owns it. She used to live in Santa Cruz. She lives in the state of Washington now. But every summer, Robert and Teresa come to Santa Cruz. Robert still has a home there. And they run NLPU, which is a training company for prac and master prac and things. And Judith Lozier. Same pictures, and so NLPU is a training company. Then we have Tony Robbins. He must have studied NLP about 1983. And as soon as he studied it, he was young, 19 or something. And he got through prac. And then he had Wyatt Woodsmall privately teach him master prac one-on-one. So he never took master prac in a training course. He took it one-on-one from Wyatt. And Wyatt brought Tony in, Washington, D.C., with the Army to do modeling of rifle shooting. And there's a whole modeling project that they did, founding the discoveries they found in there. And so Tony Robbins started getting on TV when he was 20, 21, 22, and challenging anybody that he could cure a phobia in 10 minutes on live TV. And he would test it because he'd wrangle live snakes and do other outrageous things, which created lots of publicity and acknowledgement. So he became a trainer without ever going through trainers. Then in 1984, he had a ghostwriter write the book from his presentations, Unlimited Power. He had it published by Simon & Schuster, which is, you can get anything published with Simon & Schuster. So it now became the best-selling NLP book ever, and unlimited power is NLP track with vegetarianism added for good measure, and firewalking. Tony says that he asked John Grinder, what can I do to distinguish myself? And John Grinder said, go to some other community, some other group of people, and find something they do unique and model it. So Tony supposedly went to India, found firewalking, and then turned it into his selling point. So obviously, thousands and thousands of people began going through him to NLP. So his success became a problem for Richard. So in 19, I don't know exactly, 88 or 89, Richard just told his lawyer to sue Tony. So instead of saying, let's talk, Tony, come on over, let's talk. He just, sued him for $6 million for certifying people in NLP without being an official trainer. So the lawsuit went on for a couple of years, and in 1991, Tony signed the papers, and they settled out of court for $500,000, $500,000, and he signed all the paperwork that he would now certify everybody under the Society of NLP. At that time, to certify anybody was a $200 royalty. So if you certified 5 people, that's $1,000. I always certified 20, so I always wrote checks $4,000 on my royalty. So when you complain about $5, I'll remind you again, it used to not be that way. So Richard wanted that money because here's all these thousands, and he's not getting that royalty. Well, that royalty didn't go to the society because the society was him, so he just stuck it in his pocket. But anyway, that's what happened. I was with Richard in 1991, the summer, July or August, in San Francisco. I was home, and we were doing some work together. I was working on a book or the society, and the courier came in. And the courier came in with the settlement from this lawsuit. And Richard opened it up and pulled out the papers that Tony had signed and the $500,000 check. And he was just exuberant with it. I said, "What's that?" He said, "Well, it's Tony settled the lawsuit." And I said, "So what has he agreed to?" And he said, "Well, he'll always train under the Society of NLP and send his royalty in." And I said, "What if he changes his name?" And Richard said, using Richard's words, I grabbed him by the balls, he wouldn't dare. Well, the next year, Tony dared. He changed the name, Neuro-Associative Conditioning, and never mentioned NLP again. And years later, I thought, I wasn't quick enough at the time. You just chased away the greatest salesperson you could have ever hired. If you had put the mantle on him and said, "Tony, bring the world to me. Forget about the money. Bring the world to me." If you had treated him well, so Tony, for years and years, would be on Larry King or Oprah, and he was a personal coach. I'm a neuro-associative conditioner, but he would never mention the NLP. He does in his big trainings, but not publicly. So the 1980s and 90s, NLP began to divide into these camps. And there were 3 major camps at the beginning, throughout the 1980s and 90s. Richard Bandler presented submodalities and discovered timelines about 1983, 4, 5, we don't know exactly when, at Boulder, on the other side of the Rockies. And White Woodsman was there. And Steve and Connie Ray had invited him in. And Wyatt wrote all this down about timelines. Because Richard had watched people that they talked about their past and their future. And he started asking those questions. His gift really was patterning, recognizing patterns. And so he came up with timelines. Wyatt then taught Tad James prac and master prac. And Wyatt and Tad James wrote the book 1988, Timeline Therapy. Tad claimed that he went and trademarked it. There's no indication that he actually did, but that book is full of TM. So Timeline Therapy, TM, which just means he's claiming it. If you have an R, it means register. It was never R, it was always TM. Well, 1989, I'm getting my master prac in San Diego. Tad James is one of my trainers. Wyatt Wismell is one of my trainers. And Richard had brought them in to train sections. And one day, Richard found out that Tad had trademarked, or was claimed, timeline and timeline therapy. Wyatt tells me that at a certain point, he went behind the stage, and Richard had his fist in Tad's face, and they were just about ready to go at it. Wyatt broke them up, and then without any word, the next day, Tad was gone. Where's Tad? And so Tad was gone. And he started timeline therapy franchises. So in the early 90s, there were probably 40 or 50 timeline therapy franchises around the world. So Tad claimed it and put out a license, like a franchise. There's none left. It lasted for a while. Because franchises don't seem to work in this kind of work that we do. So then there became the Tad James people. Tad James created the American Board of NLP, AB NLP. And you'll see that they used to have a journal and AB NLP. And so Tad was one of the first persons to reduce prac to 7 days, reduce master prac to about 7. And so he kind of became a pariah of just trying to go for the money. Tad then was living in Hawaii and decided that he was going to model Huna, the ancient religious traditions of Hawaii. So then he claimed to be a Huna master. And then he started doing Huna with NLP and bringing in lots of other things. So that created that division. John and Judith Zioster in 1986 created the New Code. So New Code is 1986. So that would be 30 years old. So it's not so new anymore. And New Code was John Grinder's way of reinventing his version of NLP. Richard stayed with his version. John pulled off and distinguished it by saying the 6-step reframing, where you ask your unconscious mind to make the choices. That is the heart of NLP. Because if you're consciously choosing what you want, your conscious mind is so limited, it can't intelligently do that. So we need to talk to your unconscious. So New Code started, and Judith started helping him with that. And then she left in 1986, and he married Carmen. And so now John and Carmen are the leaders of the New Code. And there's a few people, just a few around the world who are doing New Code NLP. It's just a tiny, tiny group. I would guess not more than 5 or 10 people. Michael Carroll is the key person, and Chris Hollingsworth in Australia was the second, and that's about it. and there's a few other ones. So John ran it with an iron fist, and it's just chased people away. Bandler's group stayed with, so that was the largest group, and he presented it as the Society of NLP. And that lasted into about 1991 or 2. When I took my trainer's training, 1990, we were beginning to do a lot of holographic things. So we were doing hallucinating globes around people and hallucinating, stage frames around people and putting meta programs on it and putting submodalities on it and trying. It was his way of doing some systemic work. And out of that, in 1993, came DHE, Design Human Engineering. And DHE, 1993, Richard said, we're going to throw the whole modeling thing out. Forget modeling. He saw too many science fiction movies. He said, let's think about cyborg. If you had a cyborg, and you could program in there anything you want to program in, what would you program in? So instead of finding someone who can do a piece of X-Files, let's imagine someone who can see with binoculars, but make his eyes binoculars and see a mile down the road. Let's program in the ability to have telescopic eyes, or microscopic eyes, and you can look at something at the cellular level. Great idea, good science fiction. And so DHE went on that route from 1993 on. 1999, I wrote an article, 99 or 2000, maybe 92 to 2000. Anyway, I wrote an article, 10 years, and still no beef. We had a commercial here in the States, Wendy's commercial or Burger King commercial, and they would open up the buns, tiny piece of beef. And this old lady would say, where's the beef? So I wrote an article, 10 years of DHE, and still no beef. Because I started challenging, what can you do with DHE I can't do with NLP? Because DHE was essentially hypnosis and submodalities. And 1993 or 1994, it just all collapsed. And we haven't heard of it since. So that was going on with the Bandler group. And then Richard was arrested for murder. NLP has a darker side. I don't know what it is. So there's the symbol of the Society of NLP, and that was the symbol that was all my certificates with, and that's what he claimed to have the trademark for. 1986, November. Richard Bandler is charged with the death of Corinne Christensen, who the paper and the court kept calling a prostitute who was murdered. 1988, the grand jury brings back the result of not sending it to trial because they said they didn't have enough evidence and they couldn't prove there wasn't enough proof. 2 men were in the house when Corinne was murdered. She was murdered with a gun, one gunshot right to her head, through her scalp. And James Marino was there, and Richard. James Marino was well known as a drug dealer, a pimp, and Richard Bandler. They were known too, and they thought Richard was more likely to have done this than the drug dealer. They both said, well, the other one did it. This full story is in Mother Jones magazine. And here's a picture of the acquittal of the Santa Cruz Sentinel, 1987. And this is, Richard was getting fat at that time. And so this was a big blur on NLP. Would NLP survive one of the founders murdering someone and all this drug stuff. So in the murder trial and everything that went on, there was a lot of discovery. And that's when it became public knowledge he was doing a lot of LSD, a lot of cocaine, and hanging around with wrong people. It turned out that Corinne was not just a prostitute, she was his bookkeeper. She was his personal assistant. She was managing the trainings and the organization, everything. So they were in her house with, for some reason, somebody shot her. And then the whole trial and everything went on. The case is still open. And so you can Google and actually find that it's an open case in Santa Cruz, California, because no one was ever charged with the murder. Richard was in county jail for 3 months, and it sobered him up. And I met Richard just right after that. While this was going on, Steve Andreas took Anchor Point and went about raising funds for his defense. And one of the reasons that he got off was so many medical doctors and psychologists and Army people came in to testify for his character. So that was 86, 87. And there's more dark side. So if you're not too depressed, here we go. It was not the only lawsuit. So in 1995, Richard sues John and 7 others. He sued the entire field of NLP in the United States. So in 1995, that lawsuit began. It was against John and Carmen. It was against Steve and Connie Ray. It was against Laura Ewing, who had just bought Steve and Connie Ray's business, NLP Comprehensive, because they were wanting to get out and do other things. Laura she just could not handle this $90 million lawsuit. And so she immediately sold NLP Comprehensive. And Tom Dulce from California, he had owned NLP of California. And so he bought it and ran for many years. And then there were a couple others, Will McDonald. There were 7 people and 200 John Does. John Doe means to be named. So this threat started in 1995. Within a few months of 1995, I received papers in the mail from the First Institute of NLP of San Francisco. And the manager there had sent it to me. Here's the new contract. So pages, legal stuff. And so I read through it, and there was one section. Anything I develop is Richard Bandler's intellectual property. So I crossed that out initially. A few pages later, if Richard decides to sue me, I accept full responsibility for his legal bills. I had just finished training with 20 people, so I wrote a check for $4,000, put the certificates in there so that he would sign them, and sent the certificates and the contract back. A few days later, it came back. Everything came back. You're no longer able to train. So this was Richard's attempt to try to own the whole field. That was 1995. 1997, Robert Dilts had created the Visionary Leadership Project in Santa Cruz. Bob and I drove to Santa Cruz from here. And when we got there, this was the big subject. What about the lawsuit? Does he own it? Does he have the trademark? And Bob and I had decided the year before, 1996, if he does and if we all lose and cannot train NLP, so we registered, we trademarked and registered Neuro-Semantics. So we would have something to fall back on. call it something else. So we went out to Santa Cruz in 1997. There was 200 NLP trainers there. And Robert Dilts, bless his heart, such a big heart, didn't want us to talk about it in venue. So John Grinder wanted to come and talk. So Judith Lozier announced one day, tomorrow, John Grinder's going to be out there on that grassy spot in front, and you want to talk to John, go out and talk to John. So about 50 of us went out to talk to John about the lawsuit. Because John was desperate. I need information, I need paperwork. Who's got some paperwork that can help me defend myself in this lawsuit? The next day, they made the announcement, Judith did. Richard's lawyer is out there on the green grassy spot, and anybody wants to talk to Richard's lawyer. So we went out to talk to Richard's lawyer. So this was the lawsuit. Christina Hall. The lawsuit nearly destroyed NLP because what happened is nobody wanted to be added to that lawsuit. All 7 people in that lawsuit spent up to $150,000 to $200,000 just fighting it, just getting lawyer fees and dispositions and so everybody just closed shop, changed the name. So that's what happened. And it lasted 5 years, so it just kept going on and on and on. My publisher, Martin Roberts, he owned Crown House Publications. He would call me about once a week, have you been added to the lawsuit? I said, he's not going to add me to the lawsuit. And I knew he was going to add me to the lawsuit. In the middle of all that, Richard contacted me and wanted me to do a book with him. Even though from time to time, Richard would get really upset and cursing me. And by 1997, he would not allow any of my books in his trainings. But in February 2000, Richard lost the lawsuit. Turned out he did not have the trademark. He did not have the trademark for NLP. He did not have the trademark for the Society of NLP. Christina Hall had it. She was the president of the Society of NLP. And so she won. So February, NLP was declared public domain. Richard lost the lawsuit. He was judged and convicted of owing $600,000 to Christina. And then he immediately moved to Ireland. Because if he stayed here, she could have gotten IRS after him. But the IRS doesn't have jurisdiction outside of the United States, so he moved to Ireland, where he lives to this day. And so he essentially killed NLP in the United States. That was 2000. Here's Richard and John in the year 2000 as they settled that. So what happened at that time, Richard uses the Society of NLP. He still certifies under the Society, even though Christina Hall owns it. Christina, she's not, chasing someone internationally is just clearly a headache, and she's just not that kind of person. So in the year 2001, John writes a book, Whispering in the Wind. And 2001, John's book, Whispering in the Wind, is his way of reasserting his claim on NLP and new code. So that's where he fully presents the new code, criticizes me in the book, Robert Dilts in the book, says we don't know anything about NLP. And then introduces, just in one little line, one little paragraph, oh, by the way, there was a third man, Frank Rusella. So that was in 2001. And it was probably John's way of saying, it's not just you and me, there's three of us, and you're just 1/3 now, not 1/2. So, Neuro-Semantics began. I lost my status with the Society of NLP, as well as hundreds of other trainers. So we decided to start Neuro-Semantics in 1996. Prior to that, the metastates model had been invented in 1994 on a modeling project, Resilience. I presented that at the NLP conference in Denver in September 1994. And by 1995, the International Association of NLP Trainers recognized metastates as the most significant contribution to NLP in 1995. So this was just before the lawsuit. And so we began looking at NLP through the lens of metastates and remodeling NLP. So we started remodeling it in many different ways. So there's Bob, myself, and so Bob created the first website. He kept putting that together. That was 1996 that he did that. He was interested in creating a website. I said, "What's a website?" So I said, "Well, you do that." And so he did. And then he called me and he said, "We need a vision statement." So I wrote a quick little vision statement, 2 lines, sent it to him. And within that first week, we had 2 people write or call us and say, "How can I join?" And so Bob called me, 2 people want to join. What should I tell them? And I said, "They're joined." "What have they joined?" This is how we did not think it through. So we got busy trying to think, what are we creating? And so we were really running after all the people who wanted to be a part of the collaboration. The vision was, we're going to raise NLP ethically and professionally. We're going to apply it to ourselves. We're going to give credit to other people. We're going to create a community of men and women, professional men and women, who are doing high quality NLP. And that was it. And people wanted to join. And so we had 2, 3, 5, 10 people joining every week, until by the end of the first year we had 1,000 or 2. Because there was a hunger for someone making opportunity for that to occur. And so that's how we got started. I had already been working on Bateson and Korzybski, looking at quality reflexivity, which their work was, they are the giants on whose shoulders I stood to work on reflexivity, and giving full credit to them for that. Then we were deciding to take it to the next level, and had approval of ancient people. Colin Cox was a key person along that way, really helping us to put it together. He came into Neuro-Semantics 2002 and became a trainer 2002, and then a master trainer 2005. So we registered it and created the vision and the mission. And so Neuro-Semantics discovered the higher structure of meaning. That meaning is not just mere representation. How is Neuro-Semantics different from NLP? NLP is about representation. Neuro-Semantics is about reflexivity, and how we do representation again and again and again. And that reflexivity, that spiraling, is the key distinction, which allows us to go deeper instead of just the shallowness of step by step, which was a significant contribution, significant discovery. And this is just the next one. So we set out to take it to a higher level, and that's still our theme, personally, and in ethics, and in profession. And our key values are these: self-application, or congruency and integrity, collaboration. It was started with collaboration, and we started with collaboration, and we think that we'll grow with collaboration and acknowledgement of sources, and then quality. That instead of trying to make it as quick and cheap as possible, we want to have a quality that people can actually do and be competent of what we talk about. So that when people want the highest quality, they want the Mercedes-Benz of NLP. So we started creating models, and this indicates some of the creativity that started going on in neurosemantics. 1999 framing model, the matrix model, and so just different models after models have been generated. And unlike so much of NLP, which is just repeating the same thing, and really not much new discovery, there's been lots of new discoveries. This is the front page of the website. So we've been updating the website time and time again. Just went through a major renovation of the website to where all three websites are now in one. And so working on that. David's vision for the leadership team is that we create a Neuro-Semantic University, and that the website holds that university as we move further into the 21st century. This was the leadership team in 2010. You'll notice David, myself, and Jermaine, Cheryl Lucas, Martin Urban, Tim Goodenough, Lena Veldheim, Colin, Lena, Carrie Jostel, Emilia Beck, and then Omar Salon. That was 2010. That was in San Francisco. Go get rich. That's when we went there for a 5-day thing. We met Chip Conley. We stayed at his hotel. He wrote the preface for Unleashing Leadership. He wrote the book Peak, How Great Companies Get Their Mojo, Maslow. This is the warehouse here in this town. And this was a few years later. Joseph Scott, Thimka, Cheryl Lucas, and Carrie, and Alan Fager, and then Jermaine, and then trying to think of her name. From Mexico.
Emilia.
No.
Where?
At the very end. Sylvia.
Oh, Sylvia. Is that Sylvia there? No, it's Mandy Chai.
Is that, oh, that's Mandy.
It's Mandy.
I didn't recognize Mandy. Those sunglasses on. So that's 2012. And so all the trainings that we've come up with, lots of more creativity of what we're doing in neurosemantics. So the 21st access to the matrix of your mind, emotion, body system, so that you can master the matrix of your meaning frames. And this was the anniversary, the 40th anniversary. Ian McDermott, who I wrote the book Collaborative Leadership with, Ian, and then Frank, and then Robert Hills. So we were at the 40th anniversary at Santa Cruz. And so what will the future be for NLP and neurosemantics? The open question that you will be answering.
Now.
And thank you. Entertain some questions. Unless there's no questions at all. This is the short version. What did that take? An hour and a half? The The novel will be done by the end of this year.